Good morning, Wabash. Speaking today at Pioneer Chapel is Crawfordsville Mayor Todd Barton with his talk titled Leadership Lessons from the Emergency Scene to Engineering Change. Mayor Todd Barton is a lifelong resident of Montgomery County. He grew up in the small town of Wingate prior to his family moving to Crawfordsville while he was in high school. He went on to graduate from Crawfordsville High School with the clear goal of a career in public safety. He retired from the Crawfordsville Fire Department after having served more than 26 years as a firefighter pandemic, lieutenant, assistant fire chief, and fire chief/EMS director. He was Crawfordsville's first paramedic and led the way in establishing a modern emergency medical system that is now ranked one of the best in the nation. At the age of 30, he began his studies at Wabash College as a full-time student while continuing to work full-time and raising a family. He earned his bachelor's degree as a political science major and history minor in 3 years, graduating cum laude in 2000. He was elected mayor and took office in January of 2012. Over the last decade, Mayor Barton has worked very aggressively to address long-standing challenges and put Crawfordsville on the map to the path to a bright future as a progressive community. He strives for openness and transparency. He has a weekly podcast called Crawfordsville Connection and is a regular guest on NPR's WBAA Ask the Mayor program, where he's become known for his candor and frank analysis of government in Indiana. His wife, Jamie, is a nurse practitioner, and they have 3 children. Please give a warm welcome for Mayor Todd Barton.
Good morning, Wabash. Good morning. It's great to be here as always, and it's truly an honor anytime you get asked to deliver a chapel talk. And it's nice for me to talk about things other than roads and sewers and jobs and houses and all those kinds of things. So it's nice to be here today, and I really appreciate it. The sun's shining, and everybody has spring fever. So, it's an exciting time in our world. And this world is filled with opportunity. Yes, there are problems and challenges, but coupled with those problems and challenges is the opportunity for each of you as future leaders to create solutions. There are truly no limits to what you can accomplish in your lives. And I'll be honest, I'm envious. I wish I was in your seat. Especially if I could have the benefit of knowing what I've learned thus far in my life. So today, I plan to share with you some of what I've learned thus far. And I hope it benefits you as you move forward in your lives as future leaders. Today, I will speak based on my experiences, lessons learned, sometimes the hard way, and what I've experienced in my life. I've experienced much success, and I've learned a lot of lessons along the way. From the age of 18, my life has been shaped by leadership responsibility. At the age of 18, I became an EMT in a 911 system. And when you're expected to resolve life and death crisis situations at such a young age, you learn to step up, take responsibility, and lead. But today I speak to you from a complex, varied background. Most people have heard my story, but there is much more to my story. Yes, I grew up in a small town where agriculture was king. Pretty much everybody was a farmer. My family was in the timber and logging business. They were incredibly hardworking people. We moved into Crawfordsville while I was in high school, and I spent more than 26 years as a firefighter and a paramedic in Crawfordsville. But I also worked as a paramedic in other communities around the state, and for a time found myself working at the state of Indiana's busiest Level 1 trauma center in Indianapolis. And eventually found myself working in the inner city, which was a world very different from the small town in which I grew up. And then, of course, I've had the perspective of seeing Crawfordsville as mayor for a decade now. Being a son, husband, father, brother, uncle have all been great experiences, and I've learned tremendously from each of those. And I've seen Wabash from many different perspectives, from the perspective of a townie growing up, from the perspective of a Wabash student, from the perspective of a firefighter and a paramedic responding to emergencies here on campus, in this very building sometimes, from the perspective of the fire chief who was responsible for ensuring the safety of this campus, from the perspective of the mayor who's trying to strike that balance between what's right for the college and what's right for the community, from the perspective of a Wabash parent, and probably most frightening of all, from the perspective of the father of a beautiful college-age daughter who sometimes visits campus for social events. That one truly scares me. But today, and I know who you guys are, so today I'm going to intermix advice for good times and advice for bad times, because you will experience both in your lives. Some of these things you've probably heard before, some will be new to you, and some might make you feel just a little bit uncomfortable. But each are based on my own experiences and intended to be thought-provoking ideas that you can take forward in your lives. Now, the challenge has been, as I put this together, I came up with some ideas, and I had 60. So I had to kind of scale it back and hit the highlights. Now, the attorneys would want me to say the opinions expressed herein are my own and don't necessarily reflect the city of Crawfordsville or Wabash College's views. So here we go. First and foremost, and I'm going to start out with something really heavy, and then it'll get lighter from there. But I think this is really important to understand. And everybody knows this, but nobody wants to accept this. No one, absolutely no one, none of us are guaranteed tomorrow. In fact, we're not even guaranteed the rest of today. Now, that's a lesson I learned over and over and over in my career as a paramedic. I can't even begin to tell you how many people died in my hands. Sometimes death was expected. However, more often than not, it was unexpected. Now, I tell you this today not to cause panic, to depress you, or anything like that. I tell you this today to encourage you to live your lives to the fullest. Savor every moment. Go out there and enjoy your lives, because you're not guaranteed tomorrow. And I tell you this, most importantly, to encourage you to make sure that you express yourselves to those around you. Those you care about, those you love, make sure they know how you feel. Don't assume you can tell them tomorrow. No one is guaranteed tomorrow. Next, this too shall pass. Remember this when you're going through tough times, and you will go through tough times. Regardless of how bad things seem at the time, it will pass. I was told this many years ago when I was fire chief. I was going through some personnel issues that just seemed insurmountable. And someone looked at me and said, "You know what? This too shall pass." And it did. And now it's nothing but a memory. So always keep that in mind. When you're going through the tough times, know that it will pass and better times will be ahead. The next item, listen, listen, listen. Always remember, here's a good way to remember this, very simple. You have 2 ears and 1 mouth. You should listen at least twice as much as you talk. Easy for me to say while I'm up here talking, right? You know, a few years ago I did a chapel talk. I got to think about it. You guys were in high school at the time, so. But what I talked about is everyone being very proud of their right to express themselves, but not understanding that coupled with that right to express yourself is an obligation to listen to others as they express themselves. And if you look at the rhetoric and you look at how amped up things get right now, it's because people feel like nobody's listening to them. So they don't just talk, they start yelling, and they get more outlandish in what they're saying to try to get your attention. So always try to listen to others. Many times I listen to people in my job knowing that I probably can't solve their problem, but if I just listen to them, they feel so much better. The fact that I took time to listen is very important, and it really does help the situation. So listen, listen, listen. Next is to sit in the seat of others and work to see things from their perspective. Always endeavor to put yourself on the other side of the table. I've been in situations where we have to negotiate things. I always try to get inside the head of the people on the other side of the table and understand things from their perspective. What are they after? What's important to them? What's it going to take to move the needle? You don't have to agree with their perspective. Maybe somebody who politically you very much disagree with, but try to at least get inside their head a little bit to understand where they're coming from. I've used this very successfully, to resolve issues, and it's a very valuable tool. So always try to put yourself in their seat and understand it from their perspective. Coupled with that, the next thing, endeavor to learn about differing opinions and views. Be careful. Don't narrowly limit your consumption of information to only sources with which you agree. That's a huge problem in our country today. I only listen to this news source. I only read this newspaper. Consume as much as you can. I'm not saying they're going to change your mind. I'm not saying they should change your mind. But listen and try to consume other sources so that you can try to understand a little bit of where they're coming from. This will help you, if nothing else, frame your persuasive points to convince them that maybe they're wrong. You know, the best way to understand, or the best way to convince them that maybe they're wrong, is to understand kind of what they're thinking, and then try to shape your arguments accordingly. And make friends with people who think differently. Now, I have friends here today like, wait a minute, why'd you say that? But think about that. Make friends with people who think differently. I, a lot of times, have to spend time with people that they think a lot differently than me. And maybe I wouldn't necessarily think of myself as being friends with them. But I learn from it every single time. You know, it always kind of piques people's eyebrow. They pay attention when they see me in a restaurant eating lunch with somebody that they think's my political enemy. I'm going to spend time with them. I'm going to try to get inside their head. I'm going to try to understand where they're coming from. So you should always endeavor to do that. Up next, and I know you've heard this, but I'm going to emphasize it again, own your mistakes. You will make mistakes, and I've made plenty. The key is not the mistakes we make, it's what we learn from the mistakes and how we go forward from those mistakes. Others will understand if you just own your mistake. There are a lot of things I've done, and then I come forward and say, you know what, that didn't work. That was a mistake. We're going to go forward another way. I'm going to fix it. And I never have a problem. People respect the fact that you own your mistakes, you admit them, you fix them, and you go on. Don't try to cover it up. Don't try to pass blame. Own it, fix it, and move on. Next, you can't change the past. Learn from it and move on. Now, this is not going to be a big issue at your age, but as you get older, this will start to creep in. Don't dwell on the past. Cherish the good, learn from what mistakes you've made, and move on. Keep your eyes on the road ahead. Think about this. When you're driving, if you're looking in the rearview mirror all the time and never looking out the windshield, what's going to happen? You're going to crash. The same thing in life. Always look ahead. The next thing is don't die with a good idea by not recognizing its failure. And I've seen so many mayors and elected officials fall into this trap. You know, you think you have a brilliant idea, and it doesn't work out. And some people will just continue to stay with that idea and fight to the bitter end to try to make it happen, despite the fact that at some point they have to realize this is not going to work. You know, the first time I ran for mayor, I had an idea. I put it out there about economic development. It didn't work. 4 years later, I said, look, I've tried this. It didn't work. We're going to change course. Don't die with a bad idea. If it's not working, admit it, change course, fix it, and go on. Always temper confidence with humility. Confidence is critical. You're going to need confidence as you move forward in your lives. And Midwesterners are known for sometimes being maybe a little too humble and not confident enough. You can achieve great success only to have it overlooked if you're arrogant. So always temper that confidence with humility. Let your success speak for itself. You don't need to boast. Next, avoid the temptation of revenge. Very, very important. It can be very tempting, and it can subtly sneak in to your decision making. Maybe you don't think you're being revenge or having revenge, but as you make decisions, it can creep in. Always watch for this. Because what happens with revenge is going to make your life much more difficult, and especially your professional life down the road. So avoid it up front. Treat those who've wronged you as they should have treated you all along. And that's hard. It's hard to do. The first time I was elected mayor, one of the first things I did is I reached out to everyone who had worked against me. And some of them had said some kind of nasty things. Reached out to every single one of them and tried to pull them to my team. You know, you said you were about Crawfordsville, you want to make it a great place, let's go do it. Let's all get together. Some of them came, many of them came, a few didn't, that's okay. But avoid revenge. I could have easily said, I'm going to crush all those people, I'm going to pay them back for what they did. That would not have worked in the long run. So you have to avoid revenge. Seek to build bridges with those who've worked against you. Next, again, another important one. Victory laps are for sports, not life. Your success, and when you have a victory, it's probably coming at a cost to others. Your victory is someone else's loss. Avoid those victory laps at all cost. It will make your life much easier down the road if you do that. When Crawfordsville was named a stellar community, one of the toughest talks I ever gave was getting up, giving that acceptance speech, talking about what we were going to do, while the losing community sat right in front of me, crying their eyes out. And I had been there. I got it. They put their sweat and blood and lives into making sure that they could win, and they didn't win, and we won. I could have easily just kind of trounced on them and talked about how great we were. Don't do it. Don't take a victory lap. Don't thump your chest. Don't do any of that stuff. Avoid that. That's for sports. When you win, that's what you do on the court or the field maybe, but you don't do it in life. This will pay great dividends down the road. I've been able to accomplish things because I didn't take the victory lap at the time, and I was able to pull those people in, and let's move forward, and let's have another victory together. The next one is credibility lost cannot be recovered. Another very important premise to understand, especially if you go into public service, but probably in any career. This, I think, and some people will disagree, was a hugely important lesson from the pandemic. Many of us who had been working in that realm and in that world were sounding the alarm in the early stages, the early days of the pandemic, to be very, very careful that public health did not lose its credibility. Because we knew if you lost the credibility, it was going to be so much more difficult to manage this. It's going to be difficult to convince people to do the right things. And that happened. Credibility was lost in that first year, which led to massive problems down the road. So in the first year, everybody went to the mat on everything and often confused scientific fact with hypothesis. And the public figured it out. You can't restore that credibility. Then we find ourselves in a situation with a vaccine with solid data behind it, solid data. But at that point, the credibility was questionable. And so we ended up having to try to convince people over and over and over to get the vaccine. We should not have found ourselves in that situation. Always maintain your credibility. If you don't know, say you don't know. If it's a theory, tell people it's a theory. Don't pass it off as fact. Always maintain your credibility. In my world, it's everything. It defines my relationship with this community. The first time I'm not upfront and honest with this community or upfront and honest with the city council, I'm in trouble. It's probably over. It's going to be very hard for me to effectively move things forward in the future. So maintain your credibility. The next one is never lose sight of the big picture. This is a lesson from my days as a firefighter and an incident manager. You always have to step back and look at the big picture of what's happening. It's so easy to get caught in the weeds, or what we called in emergency services tunnel vision. You're focused on one piece, and you're not seeing what's happening on the periphery. You always have to step back and look at that big picture. I spend time every day doing that. As people pull me in, and what about this little thing and that little thing? I'm like, that's fine, we have to deal with that. But we need to think about things from the 30,000-foot level sometimes. Don't lose sight of the big picture. Stay focused. Maintain your situational awareness. It's a skill we develop on the emergency side that has served me very well in this side of my life. You have to always be aware of what's going on around you from every direction and anticipating. Tied with that is the next one, always think 3 steps ahead. During my career, I had the ability to teach new responders all the time. And one of the key things I always try to tell them, you have to think 3 steps ahead. You have to think in different directions all the time. If I'm standing on a fire scene and I've got burning buildings, I better be thinking 3 or 4 steps ahead. If I'm on an accident scene and I have 3 or 4 critically injured people, I better be thinking about what's happening 3 steps ahead. I try to carry that over as mayor, and I think it would work well for you in your future. So in reality, the stuff I was working on in my office this morning is probably 3, 4, 5, 6 steps ahead. You'll probably see it in the newspaper in a month, right? You have to think ahead. You have to anticipate, what if I'm doing is working? What's going to be the next step, and so on? What if it doesn't work? What's my backup? Where am I going? Always think about those things. Up next is learn from as many people as possible and take the best from each. This is something I decided to do when I was very young and I started my career. I realized that I was working with a lot of really good, talented people. And they all had different skills. They all had different abilities. And I thought, wow, if I could take some from him and some from that person and some from that person, put it all together, I would really be good. And that's what I tried to do. So I did that as a young firefighter or paramedic, and I've tried to do it in this role as well. I'm fortunate to have worked under and for the last 5 mayors of Crawfordsville. They each had strengths, and I've tried to pick little pieces up from what each of them did to try to come together and create, take the best of each one of them, learn from it, and let's try to put that in place all together to move this community forward. This next lesson is something that I was taught by a long-term mayor in northern Indiana when I was first elected. And he said his goal is to touch one person's life every single day. 1 person a day. And think about that. If you touch one person's life every day, 365 days a year, think about the impact you can have. It doesn't have to be profound. You don't have to do something dramatic or drastic. Just take time to ask somebody how their day's going. Engage them, make them understand that you care about them. It's the little things that matter. But if you touch one person's life every day, you can have a profound impact. And ask yourself at the end of the day, I often do this, whose life did I touch today? Sometimes I can rattle off 3 or 4. Some days I'm like, I was in my office all day. I don't know. But you try to reach out and touch somebody's life every day. Next is think for yourself. And we've talked about this a little bit earlier. Consume as much information as possible. Understand that all information you consume inevitably has some bias in it, right? So you have to sort through that. One way or the other, it has some bias in it. Learn to think for yourself and make your own decisions. Don't blindly just take everything you're being told from one source and go with it. As you know, think critically. Don't force your views on others. That's a tough one, right? That's a tough one. I think it's probably one of our great flaws as humans is this instinctive desire to influence others to think like us. It just drives so many things. And wars have been fought. People have been persecuted. Go down the list. All the things that have happened because of this desire to influence others to think like us. Step back and pull yourself away from that. It continues to happen today. And it doesn't necessarily need to happen. Express your views. I'm not saying don't express your views, but don't force them on others. Sometimes you do have to respectfully agree to disagree. Another thing I'll throw out there is that what I found and what I do, the truth usually lies somewhere in the middle. There's all this rhetoric and all kinds of things being said. It's not always the case, but more often than not, I find it to be the case. And it's been very useful for me in mediating conflict. When I have neighbor versus neighbor, neighborhood versus neighborhood, this group versus that group, what I tend to find is if I kind of boil it all down, they're kind of right and they're kind of right, so I've got to find that common middle ground. You can typically find the truth somewhere in the middle. You have to remove the passion and sort out and find the facts. Up next is something we're seeing, I think, play out in our world today, and I found it incredibly helpful for me. Always give your opponent, if you find yourself in an adversarial situation, always give your opponent an exit path or an exit ramp. Don't go into this determined, I'm going to fight to the bitter death, right? And I'm going to destroy my opponent in the end. Always give them a graceful way out. Many times they will take that. They will take that. You're saving yourself and them so much damage by doing that. Give them that graceful exit thing. When I find myself in those situations, I'm always trying to make sure I include a graceful way out for people. Even if I think I'm going to win, hands down, give them a graceful way to kind of bow out and go on. Everybody will win in the end, okay? Don't be determined, because if you force them in the corner, they're going to fight to the bitter death, and that's not going to be good for anybody. I say we see this today. We see this playing out, the U.S. policy looking at Russia and Vladimir Putin, It's very evident, everybody's very aware, you have to maintain an exit ramp for somebody in that situation. Sometimes you have to accept that you must lose a battle to win the war, another bitter pill to swallow. But it's a lesson that I've learned the hard way. I can tell you when I was fire chief, I was determined I was not going to lose a single battle. Not going to lose a single battle. I'm going to fight to the end on everything. And I realized that probably wasn't the best approach. And it's a lesson I learned there that I didn't bring over, hopefully, to the mayor's office. Remember, think of the big picture. We're all competitive. We don't like to lose. I don't like to lose. I'm probably as competitive as anybody. I want to destroy other communities. I won't name them today. Every day. But sometimes you have to give, and you may lose a battle here and there. It's all about the big picture and the end goal. So step back and think about it. Up next is sleep on big decisions. This is hard for your age to understand, I get it. My former career was defined by split-second decisions. You walk into a house at 3 a.m. and there's a baby not breathing, you better make some split-second decisions, and you have to calculate drug doses out the top of your head like that. And then I became mayor, and I'm like, wow, I can think about this for a day. When you have to make those tough, big decisions, don't be impulsive, don't make snap decisions. You'll make mistakes by doing that. And sometimes the heat of the moment pushes us into things. When I have to make personnel decisions, and sometimes I have to make some that, quite frankly, stink. I don't like it. Puts a knot in your stomach. I've fired people. I've done all those things. I never make those decisions impulsively. I sleep on them. Put yourself, step back, try to look at it objectively from every angle. Sleep on your decisions, think them over. You do not have to make snap, rash decisions, and do not make them in passionate moments or impulsive moments. You also have to understand that your views will change with time. Most people don't want to accept this. Now, there may be some people whose views never change, but as you grow older, okay, your views are shaped by your upbringing, okay, that is what it is, your education, but your life experiences will have a profound impact on your views. You may find your views changing over time. That's normal. Understand that will occur. Your views today versus your views when you're 45, 55, 65 are probably going to be different. Recognize that it will happen. It's okay to evolve. The next thing, and a lot of people will argue with me about this, but that's okay. From my perspective, you don't fit neatly in an ideological box or under a label. And there's a full court press by many groups and many people and parties to convince you that you check every box under their label, that you fit neatly in this category. We're complex people, and I don't think we do. I know I don't. Can I put myself under this label and check every single box? Probably not. I know a lot of people who are maybe on the social side, they're pretty liberal, but on the fiscal side, they're pretty conservative. You mix those things together, and it's based on your life experiences, and you probably don't neatly fit under one label or another, or one ideological box. But like I said, it's a full court press to convince you that you do. Don't fall for that. Step back and think, you know what, I'm going to figure out where I fall in here. And maybe I kind of fit over here on these things, and maybe I kind of fit over here. It's okay. It's okay. We're complex people. We have complex views and experiences in our lives. I also think it's important to be very careful about letting celebrities or professional athletes shape your views. You're young and impressionable. These people are superheroes sometimes. But they're people just like us. Yes, they're very good at their given profession, but at the end of the day, they're people. They're just ordinary people like us. So we have to be very careful just blindly believing what they're telling us. Yes, listen to them, but also look at the big picture. And always ask yourself, this is hugely important, are they living up to the ideals they're promoting? Because oftentimes you'll find they aren't. So ask yourself that. Do they have the credibility to try to persuade me A or B or C, whatever? I also think it's important to take time to organize the files. You say, what do you mean by that? Well, all day long you're putting files inside up here, all day long. At some point you have to step back. For me, it's maybe taking a walk, going for a bike ride, doing something like that, just kind of unplugging. You have to take time to organize all that information you're putting in your head every day, all those experiences. You have to step back and take time. There are many days, and people see me, I'll go to lunch by myself. People are like, why is the mayor eating lunch by himself? I'm like, this is my best moment of the day, right? One, I agree with myself most of the time, but, it's my chance to kind of process what's going on and to kind of step back and think about it. So always organize the files. You'll find different things that work for you. It's also important to understand that most things painted as an emergency aren't. There's always this effort to convince you that something is an emergency, it's a crisis, we have to do something right now. And, I've been in emergencies. I've been in life and death. And unless somebody is imminently, at danger for life and death or serious injury, I don't think it's an emergency. I think we have to step back, take a breath, and look at the situation. We have probably some time to kind of think our way through this. But there's always this effort to put the full court press on to tell you that it's an emergency. And most of the time, not always, but most of the time, I'm going to tell you it's not. This next one I think is also very important, and I think it's something that we saw in the pandemic. Shaming is wrong, even for a good cause. Even if you think you're shaming for a good cause, it can have negative implications down the road. Early on in the pandemic, we saw people hesitant to wear masks, all that kind of stuff. And we saw people shaming people for not wearing masks. And I wore a mask. I'm not saying I didn't want to wear a mask. But you have to look at what happened. We had people calling others mask holes. It was on social media, right here in Crawfordsville. I saw it because they didn't wear a mask. And maybe they were, okay, but here's the thing. All you did by doing that, all anybody did by doing that is make them even more rebellious that, hey, I'm not doing what you're telling me to do. I'm going to step back. You're a jerk just like everybody else. It just had the opposite effect of what it should. Anytime you shame people, you're going to turn them off, and they're going to pull back, and they're going to go another direction, okay? So don't do it. Find positive, productive ways to get your message across, even if it's for a good cause. There were a lot of people who were very passionate during the pandemic for the right reasons, and were trying to convince people and do the right things. But they crossed over and they were shaming people. It happened with the vaccine push, too. I'm huge on the vaccine, but a lot of times the messaging was off. It came off the wrong way, and it caused us problems where in Montgomery County we ended up with less than 50% of our people getting vaccinated. That's dismal. That's terrible. We shouldn't have been in that situation. You also have to understand, and you'll see this in your careers, and this is a tough one, there are those who don't want problems fixed. Now, that sounds obvious, but what I'm talking about, there are those who are supposedly trying to fix problems who don't necessarily want them fixed. Where I've seen this is, for example, in healthcare. In Crawfordsville, we have an innovative program called Mobile Integrated Health, profoundly impactful at reducing healthcare costs and improving outcome. Sounds like a no-brainer, right? This should be easy to sell everywhere. And then what you discover is, as you get higher and higher in trying to do that, you get shut down. Because a broken healthcare system can be very profitable to a lot of people. So you have to understand there are people out there who supposedly on the surface are trying to fix things that probably truly don't want it fixed. That is what it is, just recognize it and learn how to start working around it. Always consider the end game of others. Very important lesson. When you're dealing with other people, always ask yourself, what are they really after? What's their end game? What's their ultimate goal? It may help you join forces with them. It may help you retreat from them, whatever the case is. Always try to figure out their end game, because a lot of times what they're telling you on the surface is not really their end game. So I'm always trying to analyze what someone's end game is. Another important lesson, this comes from my paramedic days, but it applies to life and especially your careers. Don't focus on the symptoms, look for the underlying cause, okay? And we do that as a society all the time. We want to go fix this thing and that thing and this thing, and we talk about all this stuff, and we get caught in the weeds. But you have to step back and say, well, what's the underlying cause of all that? Let's go fix the underlying cause. You know, as a paramedic, if I'm just trying to think, oh my gosh, this person's blood pressure is low, I have to raise their blood pressure, give them this medication. But why is their blood pressure low? I need to think about that and go fix that. Oh, look, their heart rate's 40. Bingo, okay? I got to fix that. Don't worry about the blood pressure. It'll come along. It's the same thing as a society. Don't get caught up in all the rhetoric about fixing all the symptoms. Try to fix the underlying problem. A good example in our community is drug abuse. You know, there's been a drug problem. We've come a long way. I mean, we've changed our statistics drastically, but we're focused on finding the underlying causes and going after those. So don't focus on the symptom, focus on the underlying problem. I'm skipping some here because I'm about out of time. This other one is really important to you as you start your careers, but point out the potential in others to plant the seeds for success. Now, this happened to me early in my career. They kept putting more and more responsibility on me. Okay? Now, I tell you this today because you're going to be in that situation. So as you start your careers, and those above you keep putting more work on you, keep putting more responsibility on you, don't react negatively and say, oh, I don't want all they're lazy, they're just putting this on me. They're probably doing it because they see potential in you. They're nurturing you, they're growing you, they're developing your skills and ability. Recognize that, okay? It was profoundly impactful on me. That's probably what allowed my career to blossom in the early days and take off, because they came to me and said, you know, why don't you teach a class on this? And why don't you go take a class on that and come back and all those kind of things. They believed in me. They saw the potential. Do that when you get in that position with others. You can do that on campus. But recognize that as you go into the workforce in your careers, that sometimes when they're putting all that extra stuff on you, they're doing it for a reason, and it's a good reason. Now, maybe the boss is kind of slacking. I don't know. But probably what they're doing is they're trying to grow you and nurture you. You also have to make the complicated simple, because anyone can take simple things and make them complicated. This defines pretty much everything I try to do as mayor. I spend all kinds of time trying to take bureaucracy and complicated stuff, and let's make it as simple and streamlined as possible. And there is an army of people behind me trying to recomplicate it, okay? They're trying to put all the roadblocks back, trying to put speed bumps in place, all this kind of stuff. And you wonder why. You have to wonder why. And there's many reasons why, I think. But if you strive to take the most complicated things and break it down into the simplest forms, I'm telling you, you will be so successful in this world. The world needs more of that, and this world is hungry for that. But it is not the norm, okay? You have to swim upstream to do that. But always endeavor to make complicated things simple, not simple things complicated. You've all seen the things where you take some simple process and add 20 steps to make it happen. That happens in government a lot, I can tell you, okay? You want to do the opposite. Always leave it better than you found it, self-explanatory. You do that here on campus, maybe your living unit, whatever. Do that in life. That's been my goal as mayor. I want to leave Crawfordsville better than I found it. You have to understand that change is inevitable. Don't let people yelling from the sidelines cause you to lose focus. Many of you are athletes. You know that from sports. Okay, it's the same thing in life. There's going to be people yelling. There are going to be people, this is hard to accept, who don't want you to succeed. Think about that. There are people who don't want you to succeed. You've got many people in your corners. Your families are behind you. Everybody here, the faculty's behind you. Everybody's behind you. But there will always be that jealousy from somebody else who you could be doing the most noble work out there, and there's somebody who wants you to fail. That's okay. Just accept it, prove them wrong, and go on. Don't dwell on it. Don't let it pull you down, okay? Get the facts before you speak up. You're Wabash, man. You know that. But so many times, I see people speak up and they don't have the facts, and then they end up looking foolish. And I've seen some of our groups do it. We had a group, a very well-respected group in this community that was prepared to put some stuff in the newspaper a few months ago, and I said, have you fact-checked this? Well, no. You better fact-check this, because you may be right, but you might be wrong. And what they found was they were wrong. Okay, so always get the facts. And had they printed that, had they gone forward, they would have lost a lot of credibility. And they didn't want that. Nobody wanted that. True leaders create solutions and don't just point out problems. I gave an entire chapel talk on this once, but if you're just sitting there clamoring for change and pointing out what's wrong, you're not a leader. Anybody can do that. A real leader is going to say, hey, these are the things that are wrong. Here's how I think we can fix them, and propose changes. Propose how to fix it. That's leadership. Always surround yourself with a strong team. I try to surround myself with the strongest, best, most capable people possible. Don't be intimidated by that. They're going to make you better. They're going to make the outcome better. That's what you're after. I won't talk about social media much. It is what it is, but be very careful with social media. As an employer, I can tell you one of the first things I look at is somebody's social media. If I'm going to hire somebody, they're going to look at your social media. There are companies out there that will dig everything you posted for, even if it's deleted, they'll dig it out for years past, okay? But most importantly, don't get caught up in that trap of I've got to argue my point on social media every day. You're not going to change other people's minds on social media. You're not going to do it. You know, you're just going to wreck your own life trying. I have to, remove myself from social media at times. I'm like, I can't read all this stuff. It's just too crazy. It's too far out there. Don't get caught in that trap, okay? It's great, in small doses. It's great to connect with your friends, all those kind of things. But don't try to argue your ideology or political views on social media. You're not going to accomplish anything. You're just going to be frustrated and angry in the end. You're going to get tricked into reacting sometimes. They're going to bait you. People try to do that with me all the time. They try to bait you into reacting. Don't fall for that, okay? And lastly, and most importantly, I want to just make sure you understand that you determine your own destiny. No one else does. You, each of you are going to determine your own destiny. Now, I will be the first to tell you, we don't all start in the same place in life. Some people have many more advantages than others. But in the end, we each determine where we end up. We determine our own destiny. There are plenty of people trying to tell you that you can't determine your own destiny, but you can. And I won't say you can do anything in the world, because obviously I'll never be an NBA player, right? That's obvious. I mean, there are limits, but you are going to determine where you end up. We don't start in the same spot, but we all determine where we end up. So I've covered a lot of ground, and I hope you found some of it useful and you can carry forward in your lives. As I noted earlier, I would love to be sitting in your seat today if I had the benefit of knowing some of what I've learned thus far. And it's truly been an honor for me to share some of what I've learned thus far. As you move forward and you prepare for impactful lives of leadership, I hope you can take a few of those things with you. Thank you again for allowing me to speak today. Good luck in the rest of the semester, and Wabash always fights.
A few final announcements.